Well, let's make a start then, shall we? I'd just like to welcome everyone to this particular panel of the Vienna Energy Forum. Let's get the right document. The title of this panel is How Nations, Cities and the Private Sector Push for Renewables. So what we're doing is we're going to be looking at global and local renewable energy with REN21 and guests to explore the key findings of the Renewables 2021 Global Status Report produced by REN21 earlier, well, a few weeks ago in mid-June. So we have the following speakers talking about this event. We have Rana Adib, who is the let's get your title right, Rana. You are the
I'm the executive director.
Executive director, that's right. I wanted to make sure I got the right title. So she is the executive director of REN21. Many of you will know. Then we have Banadia, who is the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific Division. And her work and interests mainly center on strategic urban planning, climate change, disaster management, water management, women empowerment, and local government. And Nadia started her career working in Japan and is also visiting professor at various Japanese universities. Then our third speaker is Julia, and she is a policy officer for Euroheat and Power, and she joined the organization in September 2019 and has worked on providing strategic advocacy and advice on various energy and environmental questions. And Julia specializes on the EU energy transition, sustainability, and circular economy issues. I am Professor Christopher Dent. I am a professor at Edge Hill University in North England in Britain. And it's my great pleasure to moderate this panel today. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is passing over first to Rana, who's going to give an overview kind of presentation on where we're at the moment with renewable energies globally and locally. And then we're going to open up an interactive discussion for the remaining time that we have. Now, what I thought might be an idea is for both Nadia and then Julia to take it in turns to respond to what Rana has said. Just give you a few minutes, say 3 or 4 minutes to respond, to set the further context for our discussion. And then I'd like to invite you who are listening into this panel to submit your own questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And then I will moderate those questions and pose them and then moderate the discussion. So have I missed anything? Does that sound okay to everyone?
Brilliant. Very good, thank you.
Okay, so Rana, my great pleasure to pass over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christopher, and thanks for moderating this panel. And hello, everybody. We're very excited to have basically the side event at the Vienna Energy Forum. And very excited actually to speak about this topic, looking at the global transition, what's happening at the country level, the cities, but also other players, the private sector. So let me share the right screen. So REN21 is about renewables now, and I think that many of you probably know REN21, but for the ones who don't, I think it's important to know where basically this discussion comes from. REN21 is the only global community of players from science academia, NGOs, governments, and industry. And I think basically this representation of the different perspectives is extremely important for all our work. It is more challenging and more messy sometimes, but extremely powerful to bring the different perspectives in, because basically identifying the common ground is fundamental in driving structural change. what we do with those players, and UNIDO is one of the members, Your Heat and Power is a member. We work together with our members, but then a broader community, approximately 2,000 experts participating, to produce decentralized intelligence, crowdsourced information to inform but also influence decision makers and really accelerate the transition towards renewable energy. So we have different publications, but I will base basically the next slides very much on two of our key publications, which are one, the Renewables Global Status Report, which is an annual reporting since 2005 on the status of renewable energy. And we just launched the last edition 3 weeks ago. Plus, we have launched in March the Renewables in Cities Global Status Report, really acknowledging for the fact that today it's national governments, but also sub-national governments who are key in driving basically the transition towards an efficient and renewable-based system. Now, let me step back from our reports. Norms do evolve, and I think this is something which is really encouraging when we think about the fact that with moving to a renewable-based system, it is about changing norms. The overarching goal is to make renewable energy mainstream. This is what needs to happen today if we are serious about Paris, if we are serious about the Sustainable Development Goals. What does this mean? And what does it mean to establish renewable energy as a norm? That it's really key to build societal support, because it's not only an energy experts discussion, it's about clearly creating a political priority, creating market acceptance. And here we are looking as much at the energy players, at the energy consumers, but also investors, financial institutions, and very clearly also the community acceptance, so about citizens' acceptance. This also means when you want to drive and redefine norms and change norms, that we clearly need today to bridge outside the renewable energy bubble and involve a diversity of players to push basically further change. And when we're thinking about the different players, and this is clearly one of the results also of our different reports, is to acknowledge for the fact that renewables is very much discussed these last couple of months and years in the climate context, but that there is a variety of drivers for renewable energy. It's about clean air and healthy environment. It's obviously about climate mitigation and adaptation, but very much also about the economic development. And when we're looking in developing countries, it's very clear that on the energy side, there is a pressure on energy supply and energy growth, but also energy for development. There is clearly also energy democracy and sovereignty, stable and secure energy supply, poverty elevation, energy access, and also reducing and better managing cost. And I think this is really something to anchor when we're looking at the next data. Let's see at 2020 specifically what happened here. It's very clear that 2020 has been disruptive and has been a year of new norms in many, many different ways, but I would like to underline two of them. One is governments have shown that they are able to mobilize resources, show leadership, and take bold action and bold decisions to address a crisis. That's a reality. And that is something to really keep in mind when we're also speaking about the climate crisis and development. The other aspect is that there has been, sorry for the background, we have lots of animals here. The other aspect is that there has been a peak in net zero commitment. So we clearly see that 2020 has set a new norm in terms of ambitions. And this is only the national government ones. We have city ambition and city net zero targets, also corporations. What is interesting is to see that they cover approximately 80% of the global CO2 emissions. Unfortunately, only about 1/5 are actually in law. So I think there is already an indication that there is a disconnect. Now, let's make a quick reality check. So we know there is a great ambition. Where do we stand? We also know that targets are not enough and you need to implement them in policy and regulatory frameworks, and that there needs to be a roadmap. Here, this slide shows basically the different renewable energy policies, and the reality is that they are stagnating. Not only in the power sector, but in particular critically when we're looking into heating and cooling and transportation, which are the greenish and the orange line, and is quite varying when you see that these sectors have been at a very low level and the policies have been stagnating since 2017. When we're looking into 2020 renewable energy investment, I think there is clearly a very positive message here, which is there has been an increase of 2%, even though there was an economic crisis. And this is something which you have probably seen in press very much. The renewable energy sector has been quite resilient. Again, I would like to put this in perspective. When we're looking into 2030 targets and the Paris agreements, IRENA and IEA have clearly assessed here that on average, investment need to triple per year. And this means comparing 2% to 200%. So again, there is a gap, and I think this is why we're having the discussion, how we can close it. The economic recovery packages could have been a major opportunity. The reality again is that there has been 6 times more spending on fossil fuel in the economic recovery packages than on renewable energy. When we're looking, this is an analysis for 31 countries, of which the G20 countries. And there is another part which REN21 has pushed forward a lot or tried to raise the awareness. Power is not energy. When we're looking into our total energy consumption, power represents 17%. And this is where basically renewable energy uptake has been very successful and accelerating with 27.1% share. We consume more than 80% for heating, cooling, and transport. And the shares on heating and cooling, so this means energy in buildings and in industry, is of 10%, for transport of 3.4%. So it clearly shows that today, when we are serious about a structural change, it's not enough to look at the energy supply. We clearly need to work on energy demand and energy demand patterns, which are particularly important when we're looking into the building sector and transportation. Now, I speak about structural change here because it is a structural change. And the reality is we need to even broaden the discussion. It's not enough to look at the renewable energy stories, and we love telling the great renewable stories, and there are so many of those. But we need to see what's happening on the energy system in total. And the reality here is, and this is a comparison of 2019 to 2009, in 10 years' time, all the efforts in renewable energy have allowed to move from a share of 8.7% in total final energy consumption to 11.2%. In the same time, the share of fossil fuel has been flat. And this is clearly linked to the increase in energy demand, but it's also linked to the fact that there has not been in the past a sufficient acknowledgement of the fact that it's not enough to support energy saving, energy efficiency and renewables, but that there needs to be a strategic and structural decision to move out of fossil fuel. Now, you could also, building on this graph, ask, can renewables deliver? And question this. The reality is, yes, they can. And the successes in the power sector actually show that they can. With the right policy support to develop the technologies, integrating this in industrialization, renewable energy can deliver. In the power sector today, renewable is the least cost option. And you see that basically 2020 has even been a record year in terms of installed capacities. Very much driven by solar PV and wind, and on the wind part, onshore and offshore wind. I spoke about the economic costs, and I think this is clearly where we see that the driver is very often not only environmental, but often economic. And when we are looking into the new power capacities, over 80% have been based on renewable power. And this is clearly an indication that it is because the costs have gone down so significantly. Another indicator for this, and the question is here, what players to bring in, is really the private sector. When we're looking into the corporate power purchase agreements, we see that in 2020 over 2019, there was a growth rate of 18%. We compare it to the overall growth rate in terms of power installed capacities, which was of 10%. And this clearly shows, and I think RE100 is very strong in this message and supporting this message, that for the private sector, investing in renewable energy does not only make environmental or social sense, so it's not only under the ESG developments, but it makes economic sense. And even to push this further, the feedback we also have from the private sector is today moving to efficient and renewable-based system is also important in terms of resilience to the market and to the customer choices. Now, what are the opportunities? I mean, we clearly see that there is a gap between the ambition and the reality. We also see that if we continue like the last 10 years, we will not get where we need to be. And this also means we need to think a bit differently and develop new strategies. So I would like to underline some, or in particular, one opportunity here. I spoke about the opportunity of private sectors and energy consumers already to push for renewable energy and to ask for renewable energy. So really on the demand side, this is one aspect. The other one is, however, that there is not only the national governments, but also subnational governments. And here, very clearly, we see that cities recognize renewable energy as an opportunity. Over 1,300 cities have a renewable energy target or policy. And this actually represents 1 billion people living in the city with a renewable target and policy, which is 25% of the urban population. The urban population is approximately 55%. What is very interesting to see is that these cities support renewable energy in different ways. It can be renewable targets, it can be net zero commitments, it can be electric vehicle targets, but we also see that there is a divestment of fossil fuel. Another aspect to underline is city governments are very much closer to the citizens, and clearly the amount of governments demanding or that have declared climate emergency illustrates that citizens are clearly asking governments to do more. So what is interesting about the cities is they are not only driving the transition by inspiring and moving their own consumption to renewable energy, they also become renewable energy producers, but they use their regulatory power. So almost 800 cities had policies supporting renewable energy. And what is really interesting here is when we're looking on the right side of the slide, that we see that there is not only focus on the power sector, but also support for heating and cooling in buildings and in transportation. And this clearly means that cities do not only have a role to play to drive the power transition, but have a particular role to play to drive citizen-supported transition in the building and the transport sector. I spoke about the divestment movement, and we clearly see that an increasing amount of cities ban fossil fuels. Here there are examples from California and European cities, one rather focusing on fossil fuel in buildings, and another one on fossil fuel in transportation. I would just like to underline here, why is the transition in those sectors so difficult? The reality is that 115 countries still subsidize fossil fuel heavily. 550 billion US dollars, I think, is the last annual support. Obviously, even though renewable energy is a least cost option, they compete in a non-level playing field. Now, what I would like to underline here is very clearly, to reach the global goals, we need local action, because this is where basically the regulatory frameworks are put in place at the national level, but also at the cities level. And this means that in the future, we will need to push for a much stronger integration between the city level, but also a much stronger integration between the different sectors to move from a power transition to an energy transition. So aligning national and city policies, but also aligning the different sectoral policies. And sorry, I'm coming back. To drive the structural shift to renewables and everywhere, I think what needs to be clear is there is a new norm of ambition, and we should really not step back on this. It's not enough to have targets. We need roadmaps and regulatory frameworks. And there is the other part is we are really speaking about the structural shift, which means political leadership, but it also means that we need to create basically the societal support and move to renewable energy in all societal and economic activities. This means speaking to players who are not yet sitting around the table. And what is interesting when you start looking at those players is, and you think a bit outside the box, you can actually identify opportunities to accelerate the transition to renewable energy that have not been in the focus during the last 10 years, whether it is cities government, whether it is the energy demand side, whether it is regulation on air quality, etc. So from REN21 side, we're clearly calling for a key performance indicator and making renewable energy, in particular the renewable energy share, a key performance indicator and integrate it in any policy, economic activity and investment decision. Because we clearly see that the diversity of players has an influence on driving the energy transition, and a performance indicator allows to put things in focus but also avoid blind spots. And I hand over to you, Chris, and thank you very much for your attention.
Rana, thank you very much indeed for a really brilliant kind of overview of a number of really key issues that we're facing at the moment on what you've just covered. So thank you very much indeed, Rana. What I'd like to do is hand over straight away to Bernardia and then on to Julia later. Give 3, 4, possibly 5 minutes to respond to Rana's talk. Maybe from Bernardia, you're based in the Asia Pacific. That's your kind of area of focus. And Julia, you're based in Europe. So you could possibly give some kind of regional dimensions to your responses. So Bernardia, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and congratulations, Rana, for a very good publication, and we found very, very useful. And I'm happy that you mentioned the important role of cities and local governments, subnational governments, particularly as I'm representing this UCLG ASPAC as the associations of cities and local governments. It's a membership-based organization, and we link more than, at the global level, 250,000 cities and local governments, of course, through the associations as well. And Asia Pacific is the largest one because it covers China, South Korea, Japan, India, Indonesia. That's the big population we have, almost represent 3.7 billion people in the world. Let me also share a little bit about our mission is to advocate and unite the voice and advocate the importance of local governments and also have this cooperation with the wider international communities. I think it's very clear that cities only occupy 2 or 3% of the land space available in the earth, but we produce more than 50% of waste. And we also see a lot of unsustainable actions. The cities account for 60 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions, and city also consume more than 75% of the natural resources. But we see cities have a lot of challenges, but cities also part of the solution. So when we look at this REN21's report, it's really comprehensive. And you detail how we can achieve this green renewable energy in multiple essential sectors. When you say that we should put KPI, renewable energy, as part of the KPI, I completely agree with that suggestion. I just want to share also in Indonesia, there have been discussions of including 3 index. One is environmental index, another one is greenhouse gas emission index, and the other one is risk reduction disaster index. This will be put as a key performance indicators for the mayors and city leaders. This is already good because we know the ego of the sectors, and then sometimes with the issue of environment, this is only handled by environmental unit. But through this kind of key performance index to this combination of these 3 aspects, I'm very sure this will be very useful. So I think it's very clear. You saw that we are nowhere near the necessary paradigm shift towards a clean, healthier, and more equitable energy future. So you also highlighted a broad range of policies, technological options, analysis, as well as examples and several recommendations for renewable energy implementation. So basically speaking as representatives and assembly of cities and local government, there are a lot we can learn from these reports. although this COVID-19, I also a little surprised that more cost of fossil fuels have been spent during this crisis. I think it's really clear that a lot of works need to be done, and then but we stood out in terms of climate change mitigation and zero carbon. I think as overall we have an important milestones for climate change policies, as many countries have a greenhouse gas targets from the year that have been expired. But we see in terms of political commitment in Asia itself, I think you know this President Xi Jinping also mentioned the carbon neutrality by 2060, and also Prime Minister Japan, Suga, and as well as South Korean presidents also set the targets of carbon neutrality by 2050. That's really helped us as local governments and cities actors here. So I think in the report you also mentioned that there is a need for raise awareness and how to improve the strategies in utilizing this renewable energy in various sectors. So I think for us, it's very clear that we really need to set high the ambitions of this. We see also in the crisis, which I call as FEWW crisis, food, energy, water, and waste. And I will share maybe a little bit later how much commitment cities and local governments have put in energy sectors, because a lot of actions have been done, not only in saving energy, but also in the renewable energy production. So I think this is a good report. Congratulations. Back to you, Christopher.
Thank you very much indeed, Banadia. So I'd like to give Yulia a chance to respond. Thank you. Yulia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christopher. And also want to take this opportunity to thank the REN21 team for inviting me to speak today. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Giulia Fornione, and I work as a policy officer at Euroheat and Power, which is the association representing district heating and cooling in Europe and international. So just to provide a very quick overview, we have over 100 members coming from more than 30 countries, which represent national district heating and cooling association, utilities, manufacturers, but also university and research centers. And our main activities consist on advocacy and representation of the sectors towards the EU institution, increasing the knowledge and visibility of the sector, research and innovation, partnerships and coalitions building, as well as events and communication activity. So today I will bring my expertise of the sectors, and I will comment on how to increase the uptake of renewable within the sector. So first of all, I would like to say that this report published by REN21, it's been very useful for us because it outlines key facts and figures about renewable energy penetration in the heating and cooling sector, which is our sector, and provides also a very valuable analysis on how to speed up the uptake of renewable energy. It also includes very interesting data showing that substantial efforts are needed to increase the renewable energy shares to enable decarbonization. And this obviously include increasing the renewable energy target in the heating and cooling sector. And this is also what we're advocating and we are supporting at the EU level for our sector. Very importantly, the report also recognized the role that district heating can play in efficiently decarbonizing our cities across the world, and provides a comprehensive overview of the district heating and cooling market, as well as this share of the current share of renewable energy and how it could further increase. And something that we usually say within our organization is that for us it's easy to talk about the benefits of district heating because obviously this is our job. But when its potential is recognized and promoted by external and reliable organizations such as REN21, it really shows a clear message, which is that the world needs better, greener district heating to decarbonize the city we live in, and to reach climate neutrality by 2050, that, as you know, is the European Union's goal. So we're definitely going to use this report for our advocacy activities in the future. Right now, it's a very important moment for the European Union. As you know, with the publication of the European Green Deal and the EU Climate Law, the European Union has set in stone that we're going to decarbonize fully by 2050. And the EU has identified the heating and cooling as one of those sectors that really needs really a speed up on the uptake of renewable energy, because as you know, the heating and cooling sector accounts for half of the European Union energy consumption, and 75% of it is still generated from fossil fuels. So this really tells us something. And maybe I can go more into the details later, but next week we can expect, we are expecting actually the first bunch of revision of legislation that will put the European Union in target to reach the new 2030 target of emission reduction of 55% by 2030. That's it from my side. If you want, I can go on more, but as you want.
No. Thank you very much indeed. Is this me struggling to press the mic off button? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, all three of you. That's to set context for our wider discussion now. Very nice indeed. So what I'd like to do is ask the audience listening into this panel to send in some questions that you would like to discuss. So let me see if you can put this, I think, either in the chat box here to the right of your screen, or you can see there is a Q&A button on the top right where you can be still the first to ask a question. So I'm not too sure people can actually contribute verbally, but Bernardia, you have a question. You have your hand.
Yes. I have a question to Rana. It's really good publication, but I wonder if there is kind of tools in which can be useful for, especially for the leaders, to decide that this is a right kind of investment, and then we expect that this could help them in making decisions. So if this something can relate to policies and or relates to basically kind of understanding and awareness that if you make investment on this, there will be a benefit of such amount. If this available, we'll be happy to share with our members from more than 24 countries in Asia and Pacific.
Okay. Can I just clarify one point before I let Rana answer? Is that city leaders, Bernardia?
Yes, city leaders.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
thank you,
city leaders normally don't read big publications.
Yes.
They really need a very simple one. We found it very useful. Thank you very much. But I also would like to speak here also on behalf of local governments and cities, especially for the leaders, because we need to, of course, in terms of commitment for the greenhouse gas emissions, there are already 10,000 cities are committed in the greenhouse gas emissions. But again, most of them are in Europe and of course not in US. But for us in developing countries, it's very, very important that there is economic benefits of what we are doing. So if this can show this kind of thing, I think that will be useful.
Thank you, Bernardia. Rana, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bernardia. I think you're pointing into a very, very important aspect, which is that REN21 as a global network indeed is basically reporting back at what is happening globally, also to show how important cities globally are and bring them to the energy debate. What we fully acknowledge is, and this is why this global to local and anchoring basically the actions much at the regional level is super important. And so I think the good news on with a focus on Southeast Asia, we're now launching basically a discussion more with players in Southeast Asia, kind of a multi-stakeholder dialogue, because we also see that it is important to create the space where we can come together, exchange on best practices. When it comes specifically to policies at the city level, REN21 is a renewable energy player, and our thinking is very much to connect with the right players from the different ecosystems. So you're a perfect partner, like ICLEI, like C40, energy cities, etc. Because you know the space, our role is not to become a city expert, so to say.
Yes.
So this bridging part is extremely important. And I think so. Collaborating on exactly how to use the information, how to prepare it, that it can serve your constituency best, is something which we would be delighted to look into. It's very clear, and we have even internal discussions. These global reports are extremely important because they become a reference in the discourse. When it comes down to driving change and changing norms, the reality is that we wouldn't be where we are if evidence-based and science-based evidence communication was enough. It is not enough. We need to touch basically, and this sounds a bit like pompeux. I don't know. I don't find the English word. Pompous. Thank you. But we need to touch players' heart. And as you rightly said, cities. So city leaders, they are concerned by cost. They are concerned by the benefits for the citizens, etc. And I think this is exactly where we now start working much more on what different tools do we need to bring together to link it to messaging and reach the right persons through the right messengers also. And so I think in let's reconnect here. A part of this, when it really comes down to policy and regulatory framework design, I think this is clearly something where REN21 as a global player does not really have this mandate at the national level. For instance, IRENA is clearly directly working with the governments. When we're looking at the city level, I think there are city networks like yours that are really important. What we are really very much looking into now is how can we group, and I think this is why the networks are so important. And we see it in Japan, we see it in Korea. The fact that the cities work together clearly had an influence on the national government. So, and I think this is where REN21 rather we position ourselves more on the connecting piece than the dots. But let's connect again on the Asian region.
Thank you very much indeed, Rana, for that. I'm just looking now. I just sent a message around to everyone asking them to send in any questions they've got. I'm just checking. Do we have something in the Q&A box? Yes, from Alexander. Thank you. Who asked this question? How can we engage with China and India? And I presume that means both at the kind of local and central government levels. So who would like to address this question? Maybe Bernardi, you'll be best positioned to start off this discussion.
Yes.
Would you like to, Tom? Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Alex.
I'm sure others can also respond on that. But for us, our engagements are mostly with cities and local governments. However, we also engage the ministries and of course the central governments and also have these associations. And China is very, very active in our networks. They created the two committees that focus on the Belt and Road local cooperations that include also the ICT, uses of IT, and of course related to environment, because the other one is related to 21st maritime century that was set up by Fuzhou, and the other one was set up by Hangzhou. So we have almost all big cities in China as members, and we also see that the commitment of central government is high, especially when they spend a lot of budget for this, electric buses and other things. So I think the moment is there. For India, it's a bit it's quite challenging because they have a different kind of political arrangements in every state of India. Since several states also have mayors and of course local governments that are quite different. So for us, we can work with China and India through local governments and cities, as well as through the associations. However, for the Southeast Asia, this is what responding to Rana, what you said about working with Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, we have what we call it ASEAN Mayors Forum. This is a platform of cities and local governments in ASEAN, Southeast Asian member states. And this received accreditation from ASEAN as the entity, the only entity of local governments affiliated with ASEAN. So we also brought the issue of climate resiliency, climate risk to zero as well at this forum. And then I think there will be quite room for collaborations, especially for cities in Southeast Asian region as well. So over to you.
Maybe just from my side, Chris, I think what I would like to underline is, and sorry if I step back again to the broad level, but I think there is a really interesting opportunity in China and in India. It's clear concerns about air quality that are a key driver to not only look into moving to renewable power generation, but also opportunities to electric mobility. And electric mobility is a very interesting entry point to also bring renewable energy into road transportation. So I think this is clearly a driver we see in China, we see in India, but overall in the region, and again where cities also play a big role. But clearly, because the pressure and the health impacts are so important, national governments also have a big role to play here. And this is clearly, so our colleagues from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition hosted at UNEP, which is a kind of a multi-stakeholder partnership too. It's really interesting to bring basically data again together, because often the policy and regulatory frameworks on the air quality side are more ambitious than on the climate front, for instance. So this is where basically the thinking outside the box applies very much, because positioning the opportunities of renewable energy in this air quality context can also really be an entry point to move away from only power to the other sectors. I think this is, and then the other part is very clearly the whole question about energy for growth. And I think there are, from China, and I think Bernardia, you mentioned this about the engagement of South Korea, Japan, and China. What has been, I think, really encouraging is that China, for the first time, their investment outside of the Chinese border, when we're looking into energy investment, have been more important in renewable energy than in fossil fuel, and in particular coal. And I think this is clearly something which is encouraging, because we see that on the finance front, also on the insurance side, there is clearly an acknowledgement for the fact that we can continue like this, and actually investing in fossil fuel is extremely risky. So I think there are some interesting signs and opportunities here. And I would like to finish on the third part. Also in India and China, we see that there are many players outside of the governments interested in moving to renewable energy. And there is clearly opportunities to activate them more actively. In this context, it's clear that economic benefits are important, job creation is important, and the broader social and environmental benefits. Maybe I underline health also, because health is, health, you spoke about food before, so the whole link to the agriculture system. And this is again where also not heating only, but cooling comes in very much. I think refrigeration of vaccination, of vaccines, for instance, is a big topic. The whole cold chains is a big topic. And the energy demand for cooling is actually one of the largest increase in the Asian region.
Thank you very much, Rana. I want to move on to ask Julia next about her thoughts about this, but just to kind of just bring one or two things together. What you're talking about really is what we talk about in my kind of subject of political economy, is risk and security. So renewables are providing, shall we say, certain security and risk solutions on things like health, food, water, and so on. The whole concept of a risk society in which we are living in at the moment, a lot of human-made risks that we haven't faced before in our civilization, and how renewables connect to providing solutions for those. Julia, could I pass over to you if you have any comments on what we've just been discussing for the last few minutes? Thank you.
Sure. Just to say, I'm not an expert on the Chinese or Indian market, so apologies for that. But what I think it's necessary, and speaking from a European perspective, and is to all look through we're all going and look to the same goal, which is decarbonize the world economy. Reach climate neutrality. So in order to be 100% successful, we need to work together, exchange best practice. For instance, Rana, you mentioned cooling, and district cooling, for instance, is becoming more and more popular, especially in the Asia Pacific area. And you know, we need to open discussion, exchange best practice, and talk to cities. For us, for our sector, is key, the work that we're doing with cities, because as you rightly say before, they're the one that really know their area, the needs of their citizen, and they really care about providing sustainable and greener energy to them. So we need to start stronger cooperation among all the level of governance, and also not just thinking about our own bubble, but exchange on an international level.
Thank you, Julia, very much indeed for those comments. I cannot see any more questions that have been passed on to us by the audience, but I do have one that will hopefully stimulate this debate a bit further, and that is to do with the, well, two things mainly, the role of business, and also how the challenges facing cities very much will depend on what kind of city we're talking about and where. So, for example, I've done a lot of work in the Asia Pacific. I know that there's a lot of kind of urban industrial, shall we say, cities where there's quite heavy industry located around the city kind of region or district. But in the parts of the world that I live in Europe, we have a few of those. But then because we're much more of a service sector based kind of city economies, like my own in Leeds, that the challenges are quite different. So in a kind of a large expanding urban industrial city, like in the Asia Pacific, where you are, Bernardia, in say, for example, Jakarta, where you've got a lot of heavy industry, where the actual heating and cooling demands from industry is going to look quite different from one city in one part of the world compared to another. Also, I was going to say about cities is that in certain parts of the world, the thermal energy requirements of a city are going to be quite different. So where I live in North Europe, we don't have much need for cooling kind of technology, more heating. Whereas in where you live, Bernardia, maybe the kind of demands of city inhabitants is going to be more on the cooling side than the heating side, because I've been to Jakarta a few times. So the role at city, we've been talking a lot about how kind of cities are working together and national policymakers and central governments are working together. And I know that coalitions are forming between national governments, between city governments, and between businesses. But where does the relationship between business and city kind of fit into this whole debate? Is it a kind of a bit of a missing link, do you think? Bernardi, maybe you'd like to go kind of first, then we can move around. Should I to unmute yourself, Bernardia?
We sometimes do like this.
Yeah, we've all done it. Thanks.
But thank you very much for the questions. Since you live here before in Asia Pacific, I think we know very well that there have been cities in the past that were so dirty, and they managed to change just less than 20 years, or less than 20 years, or less than 30 years. So the examples are there. I think this is why it's very important that cities learn based on the good examples, and this is possible, and also can raise their confidence. And we know that local governments cannot work alone, and cities have been incorporating renewable energy not only directly through the interventions such as scaling up on-site renewable energy regeneration with solar PVs or green procurement for public building, but they also put these policy landscapes at the local level. These include indirect support policies and others. But the message is here that local governments have limitation, have a challenge. It depends also on the level of decentralizations. It relates to the level of the authority or mandates that they are given, especially related to finance, related to relationship with business companies or business sectors. There are a lot of challenges in many countries because of the level of decentralizations. But there are already good examples how we see mutual benefits of cooperations especially between private companies and local governments. I think the example of Hamamatsu, that they have a biggest solar panel in Japan in collaboration with the companies, that could be seen as an example. But there are many countries as well that there is limitation of working with the different actors. So I think this very much related to level of digitalizations. This also relate to the ability of local governments to create public-private partnerships schemes, and of course create a different kind of arrangement. But what we see here, the opportunity, because I still recall when I took up these positions, I was approached by a CEO of 3 solar panel companies. They wanted to work with us, but sometimes we see a challenge whether this is the best technology for the cities. So if this kind of this kind of information can be given, then we can give a kind of basically genuine information to cities and local governments that this is the best technology that you can afford, or this is the best technology that we can apply in your city. So I think the important is having also good platforms in which companies as well as local governments can interact. In our organizations, we have also help desk. This is for climate change particularly. And then we welcome really very much what private companies can offer. But we also provide training programs among local governments and cities, how collaborations with the private sectors can be made, whether this is to contract basis or through BOO, BOT, this kind of thing we also conducted. But of course, it's varied, and this depends very much on the situation. But I see the opportunity is huge there for more collaborations.
Thank you very much, Benai. It's all very interesting, very insightful. Thank you. Julia, I wonder if I can... Sorry, Anna. Can
yes, I just want to...
Okay, sure.
Okay, go ahead, Julia. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rana. Go on, it's okay.
No, I just would like to share just from the cities report. I would like to share some findings. I think what is really interesting, often we think about bigger cities are the leading, they have more resources, etc. What we observe, however, globally is that smaller and medium-sized cities are actually more ambitious, and I think that is something which is really interesting. What I think is really important to underline to you, obviously, the socioeconomic conditions play a big role on cities' engagement, but what plays a bigger role is the governance structure. Do cities have the right actually to drive and take decisions? Do they have the regulatory capacities and mandates? And this is something where, again, the multi-level governance is fundamental. If we want in the global transition and the national transition to really get it right, it means to empower and enable the cities to also play the role they can play best. Another aspect I would like to share, however, is we have seen in many discussions with the cities that many city players do not yet recognize that they have a key role to play in driving the transition, because it's a paradigm shift. Historically, at the national governments, at the supply side, it is fossil fuel. Today, renewable energy is allowing for a complete different solution. It is decentralized, it can be local, and any energy consumer can become an energy producer. So this shifts the complete game of players. And And so I think there's a real awareness raising that needs to happen on the city front too. And then the other part is clearly this access to resources. And this can be financial resources or also resources in terms of expertise. That's again where city networks come in, but where it is also very clear that access to investment and finance is fundamental. And so here, I think I would like to echo very much what Bernardia says. There are major opportunities. We see that there are opportunities in municipalization of utilities, but also the public-private partnerships with regard to this, because there are opportunities on both sides and benefits on both sides. And jointly, there is a possibility to access basically finance, which is often much more complicated for city governments.
Thank you, Rana. Yeah, I think you've touched on a number of really important points about how renewables is creating what I call a new energy society, completely revolutionizing society's relationship with energy in our civilization. Thank you very much. Julia, you have a few more minutes left, yes. I think, according to the schedule.
Yeah,
would you like to maybe provide some? Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I would really like to comment on this because as an industry and our sector, we really cooperate closely with cities because as you might know, heating and cooling has always been more of a local issue decided by local authorities, right? So cities has been really the main driver for the decarbonization of the heating and cooling sectors. And they're definitely, local authorities are definitely the most successful in taking impactful decisions that will benefit their citizens. So what we did, for instance, Euroheat and Power, we in the past years, we really tried to engage with city representatives all across Europe. We really wanted to listen to them and share their expertise and experience with policymakers in Brussels, because as Rana rightly said, sometimes, you know, the cities are very successful in what they're doing in their area, but not often this has been recognized, or even there's no knowledge around what's really happening right there. And so there's a need for this multi-governance approach where cities bring their voice in and really contribute to the overall policy framework development, because at the end we need the right policy framework in place, right? And we need to hear from all stakeholders involved. So what we did, for instance, is really engage as much as possible with city, which, by the way, just to come back to our sector, really recognize district heating and cooling is one of the most reliable and greener solution for the decarbonization of the heating and cooling supplies, and also a good option to also alleviate energy poverty. Let's not forget that this is really becoming a real issue across the world, and an issue that we definitely need to face. So for us, it's really not a surprise that cities are at the front line on the energy transition, and their voices definitely needs to be heard. And if you agree, I'm going to post here in the chat box a link to our mini website called District Heating Cooling in Cities, where you can find example of cities across Europe where they're going to tell you with city representatives, they're going to explain to you the measure that they've taken to decarbonize their cities.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Julia. I think we've come to the end of our allocated time, but just before you all go, and that includes everyone who is logged on to this panel, Anna has put on the box next to the chat on the right-hand side a poll question for you to participate in. And Anna's question is, what are the key actions required to bring the energy and climate goals closer to reach? So you've got three options. One, introduce government policies to stimulate demand for low carbon energy technologies. Two, improve access to affordable finance for everyone. Three, amplify private sector commitment to change. Now, of course, all of those are important. I guess Anna's question is more about preferences. Which one do you think is the most important? Is that right, Anna? I presume that it is, unless you otherwise correct me. So it leaves me with nothing else to do now, but apart from say a massive thank you to Bernardia, Rana, and Julia for a really insightful and stimulating discussion. And thank you all as well for joining in this panel. I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the forum event. and hope to catch you next time.